is a Games Workshop Dominus Knight. They cost $185,
Which is way too much.
and this is a 3D printed Scavenger Defender Mark I by StationForge, which I picked up for $15 from CG Trader.
But can I print this for less than the GW equivalent? And even if I do, is it worth it?
Obviously, I can.
For real life?
Yes, but it's never that simple, is it? So let's talk about it.
The old adage goes you can either have something hard and cheap,
That's what she said.
or quick and expensive.
Let's deal with GW first. GW kits are expensive.
Way too expensive in my opinion.
But fair play to them, they're really good too. They're relatively simple to build, relatively easy to paint, and they're fun to play with.
And honestly, who is paying full price for GW kits?
So the Knight Dominus costs $185 from the Games Workshop web store. Or at least 20% less than that by clicking on one of my affiliate links. Or even less than that if you buy it secondhand from eBay.
And I got mine for around $60 from a swap meet.
So sure, if you rush out and go and buy the kit from Games Workshop, it's going to be expensive. But if you hunt around though,
We'll come back to this.
so let's talk about 3D printing. Before you can even think about 3D printing, you need a well-ventilated space to print in. So that's your first barrier. If you've not got a well-ventilated space, it's not worth messing around with the resin fumes.
Even GW models are cheaper than new lungs.
The fact is, it's never been easier to 3D print. If this idiot can do it, so can you.
You can grab a cheap 2K printer. And yes, you only need a 2K printer to print great models like this one. 4K and 8K printers are nice, but in my experience you don't need one. Mine's a Creality Halo 1, and it's the cheapest resin printer on Amazon UK, currently at $179.99. I actually got mine in a sale for a little bit less than this, I think about 140 quid. I use water washable resin and no fancy washing stations either. Although I don't really wash models like this. Oh yeah, and forget about those fancy curing stations. I cure mine under a UV lamp like this one with a reflector made from tinfoil. Ta-da!
So this whole setup cost under $250.
The software is free. I use Lychee, by the way.
It's not worth the investment for just one model, but who of us has ever just stopped at one model? So the upfront cost of a 3D printer can be easily justified. And the files are often free from sites, or available for very cheap anyway. And obviously once you have the files, you can print them as many times as you like. So back to that Knight. It costs about $15 to buy from CG Trader. There are free versions around which are close to the GWIP, but I'm not a big fan of that, but hey, I'm not your mum. I like this version better anyway, and I'm happy to pay a tenner to have it. £15 versus $160 is a no-brainer, right?
You know what else is a no-brainer?
Yeah, okay, the files are cheap. But there are a few more things people don't often think about.
There's the cost of the resin.
Big beasts like this, by the time you take into account a few print failures, use nearly a full bottle of resin, £25 a bottle. So around $60 is obviously cheaper. But there were two big reasons that had me questioning whether it wasn't just worth buying the Games Workshop model instead. And they are time and playability.
The big drawback of having a 2K printer is it takes much longer to render the layers at sufficient detail. I tend to have a longer exposure times and lower speeds to reduce the risk of print failures too. All this means that the whole thing takes a bit longer. I had a few print failures as well, which added on another 3 days of printing to my time.
Even when it did print well, I still had to run 9 separate print runs. And because each print run was at least 7 hours long, I basically decided to do this overnight. So that took 12 full days of printing, cleaning the models, and then curing them before I could finally assemble them. But when I did assemble them, boy was it worth it. The weight of this thing. This bad boy is a monster, but there's no getting away from it. That plastic one is going to be a lot easier to move around. I will say the parts of the model went together a dream, and one of the best things about resin is there's no mould lines scraping, the parts just slot together nicely, it's just perfect. Sure, the pose is a bit static, but I could have put more effort into pinning and drilling and doing that sort of stuff, but I didn't want to. So it's all good.
Until...
No. Which brings me to our final point. Unless you want an ornament, we actually want to play with our models because we don't just hoard models, do we?
Unless you buy significantly better resin, which is much more expensive. If this bad boy falls over, it's shattering into a million pieces. Huh?
Would I game with it? Yes. Because I'm not a child and I can be careful with things. but it does still make me slightly nervous.
The plastic version, however.
So what's my point? Well, in my case, I paid about $70 for my Dominus Knight from a bring and buy. A quick respray, and he was ready to paint. I paid about $50 for my 3D printed version, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit scared to touch it in case I break it.
It does look badass though.
So basically, if you've got the time and the space for a 3D printer and you think you're going to really enjoy the freedom that 3D printing brings, go for the 3D printed version. It's your hobby at the end of the day. But if you've got a little bit of spare cash and you're a little bit time poor, then honestly, the plastic version could well be the way to go for you. Just don't go and rush out and buy the Games Workshop version. There's no need to spend that sort of money. Grab a second-hand one instead.
If you want to see these bad boys painted, make sure you're subscribed.
So, make sure you work your algorithmic wizardry and let YouTube know that you enjoyed the video by liking below. As always, eternal gratitude to those who support me on Patreon and to those who join in the chats over on Discord. You know who you are. Check out my affiliate links down below, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. So make sure you work your algorithmic So make sure you work your algorithmic result. So make sure you work your algorithmic. So make sure you work your algorithmic algorithmic wizardry. Algorithmic wizardry.